mornings turn to night, and then the night becomes the day. I can't keep up with time. I keep losing still, keep hoping for that winner, and you can change my mind.
Welcome back to Connie and Jack, a rigged game. This is episode 8, the upset of a lifetime. In the 7th episode, the Littmans, Howard Specter, and Dave Wolf put the NBA on its heels with Connie's lawsuit. Now Connie had to come through with his deposition to realize his dream of playing in the NBA. But Connie injured his knee that same season and needed to have an operation. The Hawk was wounded, so Connie wondered if the lawsuit would even matter.
Not a slave if I'm already free. Not a captive if it's where I wanna be. Then the crowd calls.
As Connie prepared for his deposition in the spring of 1969, it had been 8 years since the New York City interrogation and his expulsion from Iowa University. There had been lots of low days, months, years. Valleys seemingly stretched their horizon. Connie was ostracized by society, an innocent man everyone thought was guilty. For social creatures like humans, ostracism is one of the hardest conditions to endure. Research suggests that it activates the same part of the brain involved in experiencing both physical and psychological pain. Even for a happy-go-lucky guy like Connie, his circumstances made happiness hard. Sebastian Junger wrote about this topic in his book Tribe, saying,
"Human beings need 3 basic things in order to be content. They need to feel competent at what they do.
Never an issue with Connie on the basketball court.
They need to feel authentic in their lives.
Problematic for Connie, clowning with the Trotters and playing in the B-Leagues.
And they need to feel connected to others."
Beyond his family and close friends, problematic for Connie for the 8 years between his expulsion and Dave Wolf's Life magazine article, when his innocence was finally believed by the general public. If successful, his NBA lawsuit would overturn 2 of these areas for him, autonomy and community. Connie would finally feel as though he was living the life he was supposed to live. The Littmans only had 2 weeks to prepare Connie for his deposition, and Connie was scared. Everything was riding on his performance. Where he was used to relying on his body to take a step quicker than someone or jump higher, this final test was between his ears. Real estate Connie always held deep insecurities about dating back to grade school. Adding to the challenge, Connie was going against Park Avenue's finest lawyers. Again, Fowle has the best recounting of this sequence. Howard Specter told Dave Wolf,
"Against a skilled attorney, having the truth on your side often isn't enough. Especially if, like Connie, your memory is genuinely hazy about many of the specific events. You must be prepared. We went over everything that had happened to him from the date of his birth. We explained the history of the case, the nature of the NBA's defense, and what they would try to prove, primarily getting admissions from Connie. We reviewed every fact. Then we interrogated him over and over."
The Littmans inspector repeatedly told Connie that it's okay to say, "I don't recall." In fact, it's a strength in a situation like this, where saying something false can cost you the case. Connie initially took it as a mark against his intelligence that he couldn't remember something, his mental insecurities rearing their head. But slowly, he warmed to their game plan. They worked Connie hard. As Wolf wrote,
"Everyone was tense. Tempers flared daily." Connie recalls,
"After the first few times, they really questioned me rough. David got so mad, I wanted to punch him in the mouth all the time."
But the hard work began paying off. Connie's responses became tighter. His strong work ethic was helpful. He arrived with new questions for them every morning and wanted to work into the evenings when they were ready to go home. On the morning of May 1st, it was game time. Connie told the Philadelphia Inquirer,
"I didn't know if I would win. I was prepared for defeat. In the back of my mind, I remembered the movies and stories about people who were in prison and were really innocent and finally got out after a long time."
George Gallant led the questioning for the NBA and started with some softballs. In the afternoon, the ball shrank and the velocity increased as he moved into questions about the scandal. but Connie realized he could handle everything that Gallant threw at him. He slowly gained confidence in himself and realized his hard work with the Lippmans inspector was paying off. Gallant tried to trick him at times, but Connie was rock solid. As he told Wolf,
It's like when you make your first 3 or 4 shots. You start believing in yourself.
he had a minor slip-up at the end of the first day, but it was not fatal, and he was great on day 2. At the end of the deposition, Wolf wrote,
As Roz leaned in front of Connie to speak to the court reporter, Hawk pressed forward and planted a soft kiss on her cheek.
That's never happened in a deposition before.
She laughs.
I was horrified that one of their attorneys had seen it, but they hadn't. Connie was just feeling very proud of himself, and he had every reason to feel proud.
The NBA had come away even weaker than before, says Hawk.
I was breaking out with the shines. I felt good inside. I knew I'd done good. And this was something I'd done with my head, with my brain, by thinking.
On Friday, June 6, Roz got a call from David Stern, future commissioner, who at the time was a young lawyer at Proskauer, Rose, Getz, and Mendelsohn. He was working the case with Gallant's. Stern told Roz that she'd be getting a call on Monday from Gallant's to discuss a possible settlement. As Wolf wrote,
Roz's hand shook so furiously, she could hardly keep the receiver to her ear. Rosalind recalls,
I almost dropped dead. As soon as I hung up, I ran into David's office, jumping up and down and shouting, Guess what? Guess what? Oh, guess what? For a moment, I was so excited I couldn't tell him what.
They called Connie and told him, but warned not to get his hopes up. It wasn't a done deal. There was a league meeting, and a number of NBA owners didn't want it to happen. One even leaked it to the press, which the Lippmans feared would ruin the whole deal. Gallant explained to the owners that they stood no chance in court. They had to settle, and they would. Connie arrived at the Lippmans' law office, and they explained the NBA's terms. Wolf wrote,
Hawk listened in silence, while David told him that, if the settlement came through, he would not only be accepted by the NBA, but would eventually receive $1 million. Connie says,
It was like the words didn't make sense. I didn't feel nothing at first. I couldn't relate to the money at all.
When David finished speaking, Connie was still mum. Roz said impatiently,
Well, what do you think?
I don't think I want to play in the NBA.
Howard stood up and staggered from the room. He mumbled.
The guy is crazy. Absolutely crazy.
The Littmans stared open-mouthed. Then Connie grinned. He said,
I'm just kidding. I accept.
Still, he showed no real emotion. They took him to lunch at the Carlton House, and he sat quietly while they laughed and kidded and called him their favorite millionaire. Then, suddenly, he sighed, lowered his head, and sobbed into his tablecloth.
The NBA. The NBA. After all these years.
The next question was, where would he play? On March 19, 1969, the Milwaukee Bucks and Phoenix Suns listened in on the phone as Commissioner Walter Kennedy flipped a coin for the rights to the first pick. The Suns called heads. It was tails. Trivia question, who did the Bucks take with that first pick? Probably too easy if you're over 45. The Bucks got Lou Alcindor, but Phoenix won a second coin flip against Seattle for the rights to Connie. Connie Hawkins would be a Phoenix Sun. Their owner, a real estate developer named Dick Block, called Connie and said,
Connie, I know you've been wronged. I just want you to realize that I wasn't a member of the league when those things were done to you. I'm sorry for what's happened, but I'm very glad you're going to be in the NBA now and delighted you'll be with Phoenix.
It was surreal for Connie. As he told the press,
It's been like 7 years in a fantasy land. I still think it's a dream. It's kind of hard to believe I'm here now. I was hoping desperately a settlement could be reached. I was so excited, I couldn't sleep last night.
it had actually been 8 years, not 7, for Connie. An 8-year exile. No one thought the Lippmans and Connie stood a chance when the lawsuit began. The oversized underdog won the upset of a lifetime. Connie told the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette,
The money was important, sure, but the vindication that I didn't do anything seriously wrong pleased me just as much.
And just like any great leader, in his post-game interview, He gave credit to his teammates, telling the Philadelphia Inquirer,
There were times I thought it was hopeless, but I never gave up hoping because I knew I was innocent and because of the way David and Rosalind Littman fought for me for so many years. It was their faith and some prayers which kept me going.
Roz and David Littman were mensches till the end. In their contract with Connie, they were supposed to get a large piece of the settlement. They took much less. They remained close to Connie for the rest of their lives. Connie attended their family funerals and bar mitzvahs. He was family. Commissioner Walter Kennedy continued to operate at the other end of the mensch spectrum. When he announced to the press that Connie would be joining the league, he was not forthcoming with the facts, a PR man through and through, spinning his own story. He said that Connie would be joining the Suns and that the $6 million lawsuit was dropped. But there was no mention of the $1 million settlement. When asked about a settlement, Kennedy replied, no comment. As Vern Boatner wrote in the Arizona Republic,
the fine line apparently was drawn because to admit a financial settlement was equivalent to admitting guilt and wrongfully barring Hawkins.
God forbid. 3 years later, Jerry and Max Jacobs, the owner of one of his franchises, the Cincinnati Royals, were brought in front of a Senate antitrust subcommittee because of their history of business associations with organized crime figures. As NEA sports editor Ira Berkhow wrote,
When Representative Sam Steiger from the Senate subcommittee informed Kennedy of the Jacobs situation, Kennedy told him that he called Max Jacobs. Kennedy said of the conversation,
Jacobs supplied me with certain information. The information was satisfactory.
Senator Sam Ervin, subcommittee chairman, asked if Kennedy would treat a player in the same manner. That is, ask the man if he is guilty or not, have the man reply, not guilty, and end the investigation.
Kennedy replied,
I think I would treat a player in the same manner.
Connie's 8-year exile proved that Kennedy was lying. By this point, the public saw through Kennedy. Sandy Padway wrote for the Philadelphia Inquirer,
Someone owes Connie Hawkins 8 years of his life. He can't get those years back. He may have $1 million deal now. But who is going to erase the memories of isolation, the whispers, the aspersions, the doubt? Where was the NBA all those years? Where were its investigators? Where was its justice? It took a magazine article and a lawsuit to finally move the league. And when danger appeared, the league made the quickest 180-degree turn in the history of organized sport.
It would be years before Connie saw much of the money from the lawsuit. Part of it was a $400,000 5-year no-cut contract with the Suns, but the other $600,000, the money he was paid for damages, was paid out in future annuities. He'd be paid $25,000 a year for 24 years after he reached the age of 45. There was no question he was rich, but he wasn't the $1 million man everyone thought he was. And he noticed a change in how people treated him after the lawsuit when he returned to New York in the summer of '69. As he told Dave Wolf,
There was a lot of jealousy. I guess when poor people see another poor person get money, they can't be happy for them, because they're still poor. My so-called friends started telling us we changed, taking on airs. Everybody started asking to borrow money. 100 here, 200 there. My brothers in Brooklyn wanted money. Earl wanted me to set him up in a business. Nobody would believe that I didn't have the whole $1 million right in my pocket.
Strangers approached him on the street for money. He'd get letters from people asking to put their kids through college. One woman asked Hawk for $500 to get an abortion.
At Rutgers, I'd be watching a game, and guys who hadn't said hello to me in 8 years would start crowding around, shaking my hand and wanting me to invest in something. When I told them they had to speak to my lawyer, they'd start telling people I'd gotten stingy. There was a time when I'd have liked all the attention, but I was seeing through to the phoniness, and it was depressing.
it all proved that a young kid from his neighborhood decades later had it right. Mo money, mo problems. Though he wasn't complaining, he now had financial security, which had been elusive all decade despite his talents. As Jim Goodrich wrote in Ebony,
while Hawkins rarely talks about his current financial status, he admits that there's one thing to having money that satisfied him most. He explains,
My family is set for life. I can care for my mother. I can help my brothers and sisters.
He is also better able to provide for his wife Nancy and their 2 children, Shauna and Keenan.
And as Connie told the Arizona Republic, even his daughter Shauna Lynn started acting different now that they had money.
She had a tooth come out the other day,
says Hawkins. But instead of leaving the normal dime,
I left her $1. She tried to pull out the rest of her teeth.
We're going to follow Connie to Phoenix for his rookie season with the Suns in our final episode. Right now, we're going to pivot back to Jack.
With a million angles, he's hard to track. But you can't help but want him back. Oh, he's the man with charm.
What confounded District Attorney Frank Hogan most was that the ringleader of the gambling operation was a fellow Columbia graduate. And not any graduate, but someone who brought the school great glory a decade ago as a standout basketball player. As the New York Times wrote about Hogan,
and in his favorite activity of all, Mr. Hogan, who is childless, became the ultimate loyal alumnus of Columbia. He was president of the Columbia College Alumni Association, then of the Columbia University Alumni Federation, then a university trustee.
His job now was to put a fellow Columbia Lion behind bars. Jack got to work trying to fix his trial just as he'd fixed so many basketball games. He knew Hacken wouldn't talk, but worried about Waggman. In February of 1961, he approached him and said,
"There's going to be an investigation. They're going to call in the players. They know all our names and have been following us for a couple of months."
Jack suggested that Waggman leave the city or country for a couple of weeks, but Waggman didn't like the idea of going on the lam. Jack said fine, but told Waggman to contact his players with the following advice.
"Tell them when they are called in just to deny everything that happened, and it would be impossible for them to prove the case."
He added one more piece of advice.
"Deny the fact that you ever knew them, or if they want to admit they know you, just to say they never were offered a bribe, period."
Waggman was arrested the next month on March 16th. He pled guilty 8 months later on November 30th. During that period, he saw Jack about 25 times. In one of their last visits, he told Jack that he was going to cooperate with the DA's office and said he would, quote, hope for the best. Jack told Waggman that he should go to trial instead. They had no case against Waggman, he said, and none of the players had confessed or would testify. This, of course, was false, and both men knew it. But Jack was desperate. He asked Waggman if he could possibly leave him out of what he told the DA's office, saying,
"You can tell them about Hacken, tell them about Goldberg, tell them about Lycos, tell them about all those other guys, but leave me out of it."
Waggman replied,
"I'm not going to leave anything out."
Molinas, ever more desperate, said,
"You could tell them about me, but leave out just these things. Try not to say anything about Lenny Kaplan, Billy Reed, or Kaufman from the College of Pacific."
Waggman was defiant and told Jack he wasn't leaving anything out, and he didn't. Waggman cooperated for a reduced sentence of 5 to 10 years. Jack pivoted, as Charley Rosen wrote in The Wizard of Oz.
Jack knew that by the tenets of New York state law, a conviction could not be based solely on the testimony of a co-conspirator.
Knowing Waggman couldn't do him in alone, he turned his attention to the players. If he could keep them from talking, he still had a chance. One key player for Jack was Dennis Reed of Bowling Green. In March, shortly before the scandal made headlines, Jack called Reed and said there was a jackpot brewing, but told Reed not to be concerned because he had a politician who would keep their names out of the papers. Another lie. Jack later traveled to Ohio to coach Reed on his testimony before he was brought in. He told Reed that players were being given immunity for their testimony and advised him not to worry and said,
"It's not difficult to lie before a grand jury."
Reed recalled,
"He told me to use the term I don't remember and to be vague and evasive."
Jack referenced Tony Jackson as a player who managed to talk his way out of it and, quote, made a monkey out of the grand jury. Jack finished by saying, at all costs, that Reed should never admit to receiving any money from him as a payment, and to call him Mr. Stevens when he called his office moving forward. During the summer of 1961, As the case was heating up, Jack visited Reed again. More desperate, he made Reed sign a letter saying that Jack would be his legal counsel. Jack then tried to scare Reed by telling him that immunity wasn't much protection, and he could get deported and lose citizenship. All lies. In January 1962, Reed came to talk to Jack again. This time, unbeknownst to Jack, he was cooperating and wearing a wire. This was some of their conversation. Reed began,
Look, let's face it, like you told me before, we stole together, right?
Yeah.
Reed then expressed nervousness about the grand jury testimony and that he would be all by himself.
I can go with you. You'll speak to counsel. You won't get caught. Believe me, you won't get caught.
Jack then began to rehearse Reed for the grand jury.
The only way they can get you for perjury is if you make a statement as to a fact. Now, what is a fact? A fact is something that they can controvert. If they tell you that did I ever give you $600? The answer is no. There's nobody that can come up and say I was there when he gave him $600.
How about when I called you as Mr. Stevens?
As far as Mr. Stevens is concerned, you didn't call me Mr. Stevens. You don't remember using that name.
Reed then asked what happens if he gets caught in a lie.
You made your mistake. It's just a mistake, not perjury. Just because I make a misstatement, it isn't perjury. I'm telling you, you can't get in trouble.
Of course, lying to a jury is the definition of perjury. Jack continued lying to players to try to stay out of prison. But like so many other players, Jack had shorted Reed money. Players that Jack had stiffed on payments now felt no allegiance to him during the investigation. Lenny Kaplan was another key witness. In the 5th episode, we told Kaplan's story, a familiar one. Jack never paid him his money and eventually made up an excuse that it was tied up in a Florida land deal. 2 weeks before the start of Jack's trial, he and a private detective visited Kaplan in Baltimore. Kaplan told them he had testified before the grand jury. Jack asked him,
Is it possible you took the money from me to play ball in the Eastern League?
Kaplan replied,
You know you didn't give it to me for that purpose, and I know it.
Jack's duplicity was now sealing his fate. Jack tried other means to keep the players off the witness stand. He threatened players. He advised Gary Kaufman, a player from the College of the Pacific, not to talk to the authorities because Jack's backers were the old Capone mob from Chicago. Unfortunately for Jack, Kaufman was wearing a wire when he said this. Jack was finding fixing a trial more difficult than fixing a game. The case against Jack grew strong with all the players cooperating for immunity. Hacken predictably kept his mouth shut, but even he was growing tired of Jack by then. Hacken told a reporter that Jack's bravado was an act. He said,
I'm fighting for nothing. Jack, that jerk, he's fighting for his life.
Hacken said he knew Jack was scared during this time. In fact, Hacken said,
Jack was always scared.
If he was, he didn't act like it. Jack was offered a generous deal by the state before the trial. If he admitted to fixing games, he'd have his license to practice law revoked and only serve 6 months in prison. Jack said no. He went to trial, and on February 11th, 1963, he lost. He was convicted of conspiracy, 3 counts bribery, and an attempt to suborn perjury. Judge Joseph Surratt, who called Molinas a completely amoral person, sentenced him to 10 to 15 years in a state penitentiary at Attica. Molinas recalled the moment of the sentencing.
My first reaction was, you've got to be kidding. But then I realized he wasn't kidding. It didn't hit me all at once. But when you finally walk into that prison cell and look at those 4 blank walls, you get the full impact. It's a terrible moment. You ask yourself, was it worth it? And the obvious answer is no.
Jack thought he'd only get a couple of years because, as he tells it in The Wizard of Oz,
I was an educated man, a lawyer, and my so-called crimes hadn't hurt anybody except some bettors and some bookies.
He'd forgotten about the innocent kids' lives that he ruined, like Connie, Roger Brown, Doug Moe, Charley Williams, Tony Jackson, and others. Jack serving the full sentence was unlikely. As George Vesey wrote in Newsday,
In cases where lawyers have been convicted, judges have often given light sentences, noting that disbarment was a serious penalty for a man who had put 7 years and considerable money into studying for the bar.
Jack appealed the case. Hogan responded to Jack's appeal by writing,
"The defendant's attitude towards the law, as manifested in particular by his efforts to suppress the facts of his culpability, is not the material for the rapid rehabilitation claim."
Hogan wrote what he thought of Jack's chances at rehabilitation, saying,
"Molinas's habitual involvement with gambling does not provide much hope for speedy reform. Prior to the 4-year conspiracy, the defendant had been expelled from the National Basketball Association for betting. Apparently, he did not learn from the aborted end of a promising professional basketball career, and there is no reason to suspect that Molinas has profited from the instant convictions, except perhaps to become more circumspect in the future. Indeed, even after he learned of the district attorney's investigation, Molinas still continued to arrange the fixing of basketball games."
In Jack's appeal, he made the case that the court should go easier on him because of his education and accomplishments. Hogan disagreed. His response was brilliant.
"The culpability of this defendant is not mitigated by the facts of his education or past achievements, there being no different standard of retribution for the fortunate and unfortunate. If anything, those with the greater opportunities and equipment should face the sterner social demands."
One of the great ironies of this story is that the NYPD's and DA's investigation into Jack was to preserve the sanctity of the NCAA. They trampled on kids' rights and ruined their lives to put Jack behind bars. Yet the NCAA had no sanctity to preserve. It protected a corrupt operation then, and it still does to this day. They've been stuffing their pockets for decades while giving as little as possible to the kids on whose backs they make their millions. The NCAA more resembles the early American republic, building their wealth off slave labor, than it does an organization with any integrity or class. Jack served only 10 weeks in prison before the courts allowed him out on a $35,000 bail while his appeal worked its way through the courts. But he lost his first appeal and was sent back to Attica. Ultimately, the New York State Supreme Court went easy on Jack. They reduced his sentence to 7 to 12.5 years. Though he wouldn't stay in Attica for long, he got transferred to the Tombs, the jail in Lower Manhattan, with a better quality of life. Why? His gambling had taken a new form, and the powers that be in the prison were benefiting. Jack explained in The Wizard of Odds.
"I developed a new hobby, the stock market. We were allowed to read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal every day. I was also receiving literature from the various brokerage houses, and I studied everything I could get my hands on. The rabbi at the Tombs also liked to play the market, and during morning services, he let me use his telephone to call my broker, Sandy Solomon. It didn't take me long to start making a lot of money. Soon enough, I was advising some of the inmates as to what stocks they should be buying. The natural progression was that I started making money for the guards too, and my stay at the Tombs was prolonged under very unusual circumstances. A very high official in the criminal justice system heard about my expertise on the market, and he decided to put me to work. Twice a week, a limousine would pick me up at the Tombs, one of those hideaway jobs with a bar and stereo and TV and thick curtains in the back, and I would be chauffeured to Wall Street. I was playing with about $2.5 million, and I was doing very well for him. The limo would pick me up at 10 in the morning, and I had to be back by midnight. The only stipulation was that because I was a prisoner, 2 officers would accompany me wherever I went. They used to call me Little Cinderella because I had to be home by midnight. After I did my work on Wall Street for the judge, I had the rest of the day free. So we hung out in bars and restaurants. This went on for about 3 years. The only break in the action came when I was shipped back to Attica for July and August, because living in the Tombs was like living inside an oven. My angels were really taking care of me.
Jack's quality of life in jail was better than most middle-class Americans. And though he'd proven himself incapable of living a life within the law, Jack's sentence would be twice reduced before he was finally paroled in 1968 after serving just 5 years. Jack was getting one more shot.
It's a new day somehow. Let a beat take over. Let it move your soul.
His parole jurisdiction was transferred to LA for a, quote, fresh start, and so that he could better market his life story and make it into a film. Connie went west to Phoenix for his first shot in the NBA in 1969. Jack went west to LA for his third shot in life a year later in 1970. Bruce Kiden wrote in the Philadelphia Inquirer,
Jack was living exceedingly well in a sumptuous house built into the side of a mountain that overlooks Los Angeles. He goes by Jacob Louis Molinas, back to his birth name. Jack Molinas carried too much stink.
Jack and his old friend Paul Brandt took the film idea to producer Joe Pasternak, who was interested, but the negotiations broke down. Jack and Pasternak didn't trust each other. Brandt explained the other issue.
It was prior to the making of The Godfather, and it required what at the time was a completely new approach to the mob. Pasternak felt that this was a big stumbling block. He didn't know how we'd get people to work on it.
Molinas, ever the opportunist, pivoted to a more sure bet in the movie business, porn. The mob guys, who always respected how Jack kept his mouth shut during his arrest and trial, put up the money to back him. Charley Rosen wrote in The Wizard of Oz,
Molinas told all his friends back in New York that he soon would be the Cecil B. DeMille of porn. It was difficult for producers of porno films to lose money in Los Angeles. Clayton Anderson, the LA County Assistant District Attorney, said,
There's a reason why pornography is where the mob has done best out here. In the late 60s and early 70s, porno was easily more profitable than drugs or gambling or prostitution. And a lot of the porno producers liked working with the mob because they were the only outfit who paid their bills on time.
Only true connoisseurs of the genre would recognize any of Jack's titles. His first film was an X-rated take on Billy Wilder's Some Like It Hot. It was called Caught in the Can. When he wasn't producing porn, Jack still found pickup games where he played against big names like Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, and Wilt. But friends noticed Jack changing in LA. He was still the happy-go-lucky guy with his high-pitched giggle, charming and confident, witty and making jokes and laughing at things most people wouldn't dare. That youthful, mischievous side he never outgrew. But as his old friend Bob Santini told Charley Rosen,
Jack seemed much more nervous and preoccupied. He still projected an air of confidence, just like he did when he was younger. It just didn't ring as true as before. Something wasn't quite right, and it was like he was always looking over his shoulder. Jack never talked about his business dealings, but the impression I got was that, whatever he was into, he was involved with dangerous people.
Friends again warned him of the troubles ahead if he kept associating with these dangerous people. Jack would reply,
Don't worry about me. I'm not doing anything that's going to get me killed, and I never will.
His gambling never stopped. More and more, he didn't pay back what he owed on bets. He'd head to Vegas, lose thousands of dollars on credit, and take off without repaying them. The Vegas operators didn't go near him because of his mob ties, but those were fraying. Jack wasn't making them the kind of money he used to, and there was only so much they owed him for staying quiet. He became expendable. In 1973, he was arrested in LA on charges of shipping porno films across state lines from LA to Memphis. Then, a year later, Jack's business partner Bernard Gusoff was found beaten to death in his LA apartment. The murder was never solved, but Jack collected $500,000 on a life insurance policy that each held on the other as partners. The partnership had broken up, but Jack kept making payments on the policy, and the murder happened only 3 weeks before it expired. Everyone thought Jack was involved with Gusoff's murder. But he wasn't arrested, even though he collected $500,000 on the insurance policy. Gusoff's son, Stuart, said,
I think Molinas hired somebody to kill my father so that he could collect the insurance money.
Stuart was correct, but it wasn't proven until years later, as Frank Lombardi wrote for the Daily News.
The cops weren't able to link Molinas to Gusoff's murder until nearly 4 years later, when mob informer Jimmy the Weasel Fratiano claimed that Molinas had paid a Los Angeles gangster named Mike Reezy $50,000 to kill Gusoff for the insurance money. No murder charge was ever brought against Reezy, although authorities believe Fratiano's story.
It wouldn't matter. Jack dug his own grave before that discovery. It tied back to his gambling debts. It was harder to claim he didn't have people's money when he just collected $500,000 on a life insurance policy. In The Wizard of Oz, Charley Rosen wrote about what happened next.
In mid-July, at the Arrowhead Hot Springs Hotel in eastern Orange County, A meeting was convened of most of the high-echelon mafia bosses in the country. The topics ranged from territorial disputes in New York City and scouting reports on up-and-coming hitmen, to which newly elected politicians were worth buying. Also on the agenda was the status of Jack Molinas, and a number of West Coast administrators were granted an audience to relate their grievances against him.
It was a long list. The Periano family had an unpaid loan of almost $250,000. Instead of paying them with the insurance money, Jack bought a Rolls-Royce. Jack also owed more than $100,000 to mob-backed Vegas casinos. He owed at least $50,000 to LA bookies. And Johnny Bumpin' Sierra, who ran the mob's porno film interests, said that Jack had overstepped on his territory. Jack still had a couple things in his favor. He never gave up the names of other NBA pros doing business way back when, and he apparently sheltered a couple of hitmen for the Gambiano family. But the current word from New York was that, quote, there was no obligation outstanding. Out in LA, he'd been under the protective custody of a well-respected soldier named Mickey Zaffarano, but that was now over. So when the vote came up, there was a unanimous decision for the termination of Jack's life. A couple weeks later, on Sunday, August 3rd, 1975, Jack had dinner with his mother Betty, who was in town visiting. Later that night, in the early morning hours, he jumped into his Rolls-Royce to pick up an old female acquaintance who flew in from New York to visit, a 35-year-old divorcee named Shirley Marcus. Pulling out of his Hollywood Hills home, Jack spotted a hit team outside of his house and eluded them in a high-speed chase down the hills. He didn't call the cops. Instead, he picked up Shirley at LAX around 1 a.m. and returned home. He parked his car in the garage. He and Shirley walked to the back patio, and Jack pointed to the sparkling lights of LA below. He asked her a question.
Isn't this the most beautiful place you could live, compared to Brooklyn?
Just then, a silenced .22 caliber pistol fired 5 shots rapidly. 2 missed. 1 hit Shirley, who survived. 1 hit Jack's dog in the paw, and the last tore into the back of Jack's neck. Jack used to tell friends,
you only live once. If you do it right, once is enough.
Jack now laid face up on the pavement, his one life over.
In our 9th and final episode, we follow Connie entering the NBA as a 27-year-old rookie with colossal expectations. And then we end our series by taking a trip into an alternate universe, the Connieverse, to see what Connie's career and life would have looked like if he wasn't wrongfully blackballed by the NBA.
Then the crowd calls, who's gonna catch me when I fall down?